So this session is called Co-Production of Lens Systems, Research Design, Methods and Different Roles of Actors and Their Knowledge. And the idea behind that was to say, okay, when we deal with questions of transforming lens systems, then these questions are related to a high degree of complexities, different interests, uncertainties as well, unknowns, many different normative ideas about where to go, or also about how the problem looks like. With this, or in this context, integrative approaches have developed or are emphasized in their importance. Integrative approaches like transdisciplinarity, or some of us call them transdisciplinary. Others talk about co-production and co-design. Again, others say it's community-based research management. However, I think in the end it is very interesting that we maybe learn all from each other, because these are approaches that are very challenging. And in every case or every project we have to adapt these approaches. So I was very much interested in the very different cases you bring in, and we could maybe talk about, discuss about, see what challenges come up with these approaches, what successes you have, what interesting thoughts. So actually we had 6 presentations. One was cancelled because Narcisa Pricope could not come. The flight was cancelled. She was stuck in Dallas yesterday. Yesterday was not the best day, I guess. But okay, so we have a little bit more time for the other talks. And we start now with Paula.
Okay, thank you, Jana. Okay, so I'm going to talk about one of those case studies, and I'm particularly talking about co-production of an integrated land system model for policy support. So here I'm specifically looking at the case of supporting government policy. And this is an example where we were doing some work with the Welsh Government, which is one of our devolved administrations of the UK based on Wales. So I want to first just start by actually talking about some of the challenges about actually how you start to build trust in using models in policy support. So again, when we look in the literature, we see several challenges that arise when we look at how do we build co-production so these models are actually used as part of the policy cycle. Some of the key issues that come out are the fact that there is limited stakeholder engagement in the modelling process. So even some projects that say where they do stakeholder engagement, this can be sort of 1 or 2 workshops. It can often be one way. It's not really proper two-way co-design. The models, because they're complex, are often seen as quite opaque. Often we hear the term black box. And this is also very linked to the next bullet point, where we often see this inadequate transparency in the assumptions that both underpin the model, but underpin the scenarios that those models are then applied for. You also see criticisms in the literature of inadequate peer review. And again, this is getting your models out there within the scientific community so that, again, we can learn from each other's models in an open way and peer review each other's strengths and weaknesses, because all models serve a different purpose. We also see, again, this is specific to policy support, there's often a lack of flexibility in particularly hardwired integrated models, which have a very fixed system architecture. And it's very difficult to rapidly adapt those type of models to policy needs which evolve very rapidly in short spans of time. And then the other one it's criticism we often see in the literature is this, how do these models deal with uncertainty, and how is that uncertainty communicated into that policy cycle? So I'm going to talk about, just collectively they all lead to this lack of trust both in the model itself and understanding in the model itself, and a lack of trust in the model outputs. So I'm just going to talk about this case where we've tried to tackle some of those criticisms, and it's called the ERAMP Integrated Modelling Platform. So just very briefly I'm going to introduce it, but then I'm mainly going to focus on the co-production process of the model rather than its actual outputs. So the platform itself was commissioned by the Welsh Government because they wanted a tool to help them explore the effects of different policy and management interventions on farms, on their viability into the medium to long term, their land use, their biodiversity, and a range of different ecosystem services. Now, the Welsh Government explicitly requested an integrated approach because a lot of their policy is centered around holistic approaches, recognizing that effects in one policy sector can have indirect effects in other policy sectors or potentially unintended consequences. So to do this, we worked with Welsh Government to choose a set of specialised models that we then chain together into an integrated framework, and they cover agriculture, forestry, how they interact together to affect land use allocation decisions, and then the effects of those on biodiversity, particularly looking at plants and birds, and various ecosystem services, including water quality, air quality, carbon, and a range of other greenhouse gases. And those ecosystem services we also value in monetary terms, as well as providing their outputs in biophysical terms. The model was co-designed with experts from Welsh Government, so both the inputs of the model could reflect interventions that the government wanted to test in the model, but also the outputs talked to how they needed to create business cases for their different policies. So the way the model has been used so far, and this is just a few of them, is looking at different trade policies. So when the UK left the European Union, it wanted to look at different free trade agreements with different countries. When it's looking now to redevelop new policies and payments to farmers and subsidies, where the Welsh Government is developing a specific sustainable farming scheme. And importantly, the last point there in the slide, and I'll come back to this a little bit later in my presentation, is that once the model moved into being actively used as part of the policy cycle, the government designated the model as business critical, and that has implications for how the model is used, but also particularly the quality assurance and transparency processes that the model is required to be compliant against. So just to give you a little brief introduction to the model, I'm not going to go through this complicated chain because I know you won't be able to read any of the bits in any case. So there's a very simplistic summary here on the right-hand side, or your left-hand side of the slide. So it basically would take these scenario inputs that we would develop with the policy team in Welsh Government. So they could be market changes like commodity prices, they could be farmer payments, they could be new regulations, they could be changes in just farm management practices. And combined with sets of biophysical data, their input into the sets of farm and forestry models, they can interact with each other so that you can have parts of forestry in farming, such as agroforestry and other multifunctional land use systems. They provide outputs related to livestock yields, etc., and the economics of those different options, which goes into the land allocation module, which selects the different options based on the outcomes that produces in terms of land use, management, and profitability. And then the consequences of that go into sets of models on biodiversity and ecosystem services, which are then valued in terms of both the monetary and the biophysical values to provide the outputs for the policy. And here, just to emphasize that no one institute can do this. So I coordinate this team, but it's a multi-institutional team that brings together all of this expertise to the Welsh Government working in partnership. And then just very briefly, the last bit of introduction to the modelling is the spatial scale that the model works at, which is primarily farm and field scale. And again, this was in request to the commissioning process and discussions with the Welsh Government, where we work at this decision-making unit scale. And that is the scale in the upper map, where you see the black lines, which are shown in red lines, which are small agricultural areas that the Welsh Government used for some reporting of their statistics. But this was seen as really important because a lot of the subsidies or the interventions have to happen at farm scale or subfield scale, so we had to represent that within the model. But also we know that other scales are more relevant for other processes in the model. For example, when we're looking at water quality, we aggregate and accumulate to catchment scale. So the model actually operates on multiple scales depending on the output indicators that we're computing. So this is now to go into the co-creation process. And I think here the key thing is the long-term funding that has been associated with this co-creation process. So we're now, I hope this will come out, we're now at the orange today, so we're 7 years since we started, but we still have now funding for another 8 years to the end of this next funding cycle. So I'm sure a lot of people are going, wow, you've got 15 years of funding, which is very unusual, we know, in the academic cycle. And it didn't start off with us having 15 years of funding. We went through a 3-year phase first, where the project was commissioned, and there was a lot of discussion then about actually what the platform had to do, how it should be developed, what models should be included in it, how they should be chained together. That led to a prototype, and the development of that prototype really helped the two-way understanding between the Welsh Government officials and the project team in terms of actually understanding what types of questions it could answer and what the framing of the modelling platform needed to be developed to be able to answer those questions. So the model started being used during this model application phase here. And during that phase, again, it has to be flexible enough to be adapted for different modelling application purposes when we work with different policy teams in Welsh Government. And partially due to the success of the 2 phases of what's called ERAP 1, the government then really had bought into having this model as part of its policy cycle, and hence went for the 10-year funding phase in 5 series of 2-year funds, so that then we iterate every 2 years with them on how we update it. But that is guaranteed now as part of the longer-term policy funding coming through from the government. Thank you. So this is a bit I wanted to come back to on when the model was designated as business critical, while we were using it in anger. What that means is any model that's used for explicitly in relation to government policy in the UK has to be compliant with what's called the Treasury's Aqua Book. And this Aqua Book has certain compliance around roles and responsibilities. One of those roles and responsibilities, they're on both sides. So they're also on the government side as well as the modelling team side. And what it means is that the government has to nominate a senior responsible officer who is usually a deputy director or director within a Welsh Government policy team. And they have to sign off all of our assumptions, all our quality assurance that underpin the model. And to be able to do that, they have to be explained by the policy officers within the government. It also stipulates quite a lot of detail about quality assurance, where we have to follow this scheme of RIGOR, with RIGOR as an acronym which stands for our analysis should be repeatable, independent, grounded in reality, objective, have uncertainty being managed, and it should be robust with respect to the policy question that we're addressing. So what we do during every model application is we have weekly meetings with the government to first document all the assumptions behind that particular scenario application. Once that is agreed, that gets signed off by the senior responsible officer in Welsh Government. And then as we go through the process of that run, we do all of this QA analysis and document that. And then at the end of it, that also then gets signed off so that we have transparent documentation across each run. What we produce at the end of each run is a set of outputs. So we were requested to produce these as slide packs so that within government they can use them for their own communication, both internally, so when policy officials have to communicate up to ministers, but also externally when they do their own stakeholder engagement out to either NGOs, general public, farming unions, etc. So we create these slide packs, but we have detailed notes with these slide packs that remind them of the different limits to knowledge and the assumptions that underpin that particular scenario analysis, and at the interpretation of the uncertainties that go with each of those slides as well. And you can see our outputs are delivered at different levels, so some of them are spatially explicit maps. Other than we use the regions that the Welsh Government report on and we aggregate to their regions, and some of it is just at the whole of Wales scale. Depending on, again, we go through a discussion with them on their preferences for the types of outputs that would be most useful in each run that we do. So I've got just 2 slides to try and sort of summarise. And I think this is the most important, which was our lessons learned. So I just want to go through some of these 5 points. And I think the first part of our lesson learned through this process is that iterative co-design is really important. And for us, that is two-way. It's a continual learning process. And it has built up, again, what we would say from both sides, a long-term partnership between government and the policy team, so that there is trust there in how we work together. But what we mean by iterative co-design here is that this is weekly meetings that have been going on for 7 years, so we know each other very well. We're very lucky that the people that we work in with the head of evidence in Welsh Government hasn't changed in that 7-year period, and that has really helped build that relationship up as well. But also what that has mean is that there's been a learning process for both parties on both sides, in that they've bought in to trusting models as part of their policy cycle. And we as a modelling team have sort of learned how to adjust and use and develop our models so it is more responsive to policy needs. And part of that early learning was when government was asking us questions, they were often very broad, very vague, and really difficult to model. So the learning process, again, was almost emergent, that they had to government learned how to ask a question that the modelling team could then say, oh yes, we know what you mean, we can represent that, let's have a conversation around it. So that was really important, that really iterative process to actually learn that they were asking for a question, not asking for an answer of the model. The second really important one was around transparency of the model and its assumptions. And here, for us, the compliance with the Aqua book was really useful. Again, when we were told we would have to be compliant with this, I guess as a modelling team we were quite nervous, but actually it's been extremely useful for us because it protects us when the policies go out and be implemented in practice, because everything is documented, everything is transparent, it has been signed off, at least at that deputy director level. What it's also meant is that there is much greater understanding with the people in government that we work closely with, of the limitations of the model, of what it can and can't do. And they can then also relate that when they have to communicate about the model up to ministers or to other people in government. The other key bits that I wanted to summarise was the importance of flexibility and timeliness. And here again, the quick lessons learned here was that we moved away from hardwired system architecture. So our models are soft coupled by deliberate choice, in that it is a partnership between the modelers and the Welsh Government that gives us that adaptability to change really quickly to government needs. And that also adaptability allows us to deliver at a pace that is really needed by government to be able to use the model in their policy cycle. And I've already mentioned the importance of the long-term funding. Oh, wrong way. So again, just to summarise, again, we've demonstrated that long-term funding has been really useful for building trust in this complex integrated model, and that's been supplemented by this customizable modelling framework that's flexible to adapt to policy needs in near real time. And we've been told by Welsh Government, we did a questionnaire with them, that has facilitated cultural change within their government, where they're now actively using it to explore, test and iterate policy ideas prior to their final design and implementation. And if you want any more information, we have published the model and it's available on that DOI.
Thank you very much. Does it work, the microphone? Okay. So maybe we have time left for 2 or 3 questions on this talk.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Paula. That was great. I was just wondering whether you could reflect perhaps on any of the challenges or constraints that you've faced with co-designing a model with government.
I think you have to accept as an academic that it's a completely different way of working. So your normal things, metrics that you get judged on, your publications and those kind of things, you have to almost push them aside a little bit because you're working in a very sensitive and confidential environment. So you can't, by nature, publish any of this until several years after, and when you've had permission that you're allowed to publish it. So that is, I guess, depending on where you are in your career as an academic, you have to almost then value the impact you're having over the publications. So we were allowed to publish that one because the scenarios were deemed less sensitive, that they could go out there. And Welsh Government also did want to have the model itself peer-reviewed because they thought that gave it more credibility for them to be using a model that was already out there in literature. But yes, some of the other more sensitive work will never see the light of day, which as an academic is more problematic. But you've got to then say the comfort for you is that you're getting high impact. And it's a real learning process as well, I think. I would never have known at the beginning of this cycle how much I have learned through it. And I think they have also learned, and there's been many challenges that we face, particularly about understanding our own, just understanding their needs versus what we could provide. That took quite a lot of iteration in those first 2 years before we got to the prototype stage. Now, you can't really underestimate how hard that was. And then you suddenly get past that, I think, and then it's much easier. Now we've got past that.
Okay, thank you very much, Paula. If there are no further questions, now we come to the next talk. It's Svetlana, and she will talk about soil as a source of collective knowledge.
Can you hear me? Yes, it's working. Hi, everyone. I'll probably start a little bit with a short introduction. I'm Svetlana Lavrinchuk from Busse Academy of Nature at the University of Bern. I'm a spatial practitioner, so I work at the intersection of science and art. I use methods from both. I am a cartographer, architect by training, so keep that in mind as we dive into the presentation. So, okay, there we go. Thank you. So before we start, I would actually like to highlight our team, project team in Madagascar, who are instrumental in shaping the project into its current form. And without them, it would not be present in its current shape and form. Wrong way. Great. So today we will talk about soils and about the construction of the knowledge around soils and why soils are important. Well, as we know, we are in the current crisis of social, environmental care, and the importance of soils can hardly be overstated. It is described by Bella Casa as case of absence. It's all around us, but hardly apparent for many of us. It is also can be described as infrastructure of bias. And I really want to highlight that important framing. As in this project, we view soil as a form of underground infrastructure that supports life. And it also allows us to start the conversation about traditional ecological knowledge, about relational values, which we'll dive into, and about the collective belonging. So we see it as a node in the conservation of environmental and biocultural heritage. As we know, there is a growing body of research and practice that's addressing the relationships between humans and more than humans as matters of care, which steps away from technical practices, scales, and economies. And we specifically look at soil through this lens of ecofeminism, and we approach every single step through that in mind. So we'll dive into a short research journey to Madagascar. Our project is located in the buffer zone of Masala National Park, and as I mentioned, we examine complex relationships between humans and soils and the land. And those relationships are mediated through traditional practices of environmental care. We look at soil through the framework of relational values, the existing framework, and here I probably would want to mention one of the challenges or limitations through that is that we're coming into the context with an existing framework due to limitations in time, etc. But there is also a question, should then the framework be developed from the ground up? But that's as a side note and as a side reflection. So we look at soil beyond its biophysical properties. We look at it through profound spiritual and cultural significance. The project is quite multifaceted in its nature. It has a few research questions. Today we'll talk a little bit more about the relevance and contribution of soil relational values to equitable conservation models and why it is important to bring that into the policy dialogue. When I mentioned the project is multifaceted, what I mean is we do have a range of outputs, including a video documentary that is currently in production. We've done cognitive mapping with the participants. Of course, we investigated relational values, and we also done the analysis of the biomass of soil. So it's quite exploratory and experimental in its nature, with the aim to find the best methods and ways of capturing traditional knowledge and kind of staying true to that, if that makes sense. So we'll focus on one valley, which is in the buffer zone of the Massawa National Park. And we trace these footsteps across 5 villages. And the further in the valley we go, it's almost the further back in time in development terms we step. And here the soil is really a container for stories of belonging, for relations with the ancestors, the multi-generational relations, and we found it incredibly rich. I will quickly mention that given the breadth of term values that exist in the literature, we focused on relational values defined by Jana now, such as individual identity, stewardship, cultural identity, social cohesion, social responsibility, and moral responsibility. We won't dive more into that, perhaps into questions, but that was the framework we used to start addressing the questions of relations with soil. Now, our methodology was very much a response to decoloniality debate. We wanted to be as an invitation to the participants to, in some ways, appropriate it and guide the way we go. We wanted to hear their stories, and we didn't want to create very strict parameters. So we used, if we focus on semi-structured qualitative interviews, which were done during long-distance walk. And the way we approached it was very open-ended. We didn't know what stories we will hear. We didn't want to set certain parameters. We interviewed members of the family, and that was quite multi-generational. We wanted to see what is the difference between perception and relation with land and soil across generations. How was that impacted through development and through other things I'll mention. And long-distance walking has become a key into creating that safe space. And it was almost, we were guests in the landscape, and we were guided through that landscape. The walk sometimes took 4 to 6 hours. The interviews were 3 to 4 hours long. They were very in-depth, and it was absolutely crucial to start untangling the power, like the existing power dynamics that exist when a researcher comes to this context in Madagascar. We were diving into very deep topics and quite emotional, quite personal and intimate. So the set and setting, and even like the choreography, how the interview conducted, was incredibly important. Everything was recorded on the video with the consent. And I can even talk more about the choreography of the space and how we've done that, but that was, we spent a lot of time and a lot of attention to that particular detail. The data collection and analysis were integrated. We allowed for exploration of new themes that we didn't anticipate and that emerged from participants. And it was really about creating a research that is embodied, that is relational and situated in a specific landscape. Probably we'll skip that. These are some stills from the video documentaries, and we really felt that we unveiled a very profound narrative of how soil care intertwines with social and cultural fabric of the villages in the valley. And I would like to highlight 3 key preliminary findings. Individual identity in relation to soil is deeply tied to personal and cultural connections with land, and that was very evident through all the interviews. And stakeholders attribute meaning to soil based on their interactions, practices, and benefits it provides. making it a key component of identity formation and community cohesion. And a few interesting things appear here. There are a few traditional practices and rituals where there is a reciprocal help between the villages without any monetary gain. And we felt that has become to erode with the development in the villages. There is also rituals where participants prepare a meal for their ancestors in spirit in the soil, and that has also been impacted by the ongoing development. And interestingly enough, and for me it was completely unexpected, the advent of Christianity has profoundly altered the traditional practices of soil care, and that resulted in fragmentation of certain parts of society in the valley and loss of community cohesion, relational value associated with soil. So we almost begin to see like a polarity of society, and we're still analyzing it, and we're going to dive a little bit more into that as we found it as a very interesting finding, and as I mentioned, for me it was quite unexpected. Well, why is it important? Why is it important to go into those cultural narratives? We did hear many times that we're in the golden age of remote sensing, and that is very true. But in the context of conservation, or especially equitable conservation models and policy making, we can observe like a certain polarity. And on one hand, we have cultural narratives. On the other hand, we have technological observation. And I find these two sides present two different perspectives on environment management. So on one side, cultural narratives, they emphasize the intrinsic value, the spirituality and interconnectedness of forests, viewing them as living entities with inherent rights and significance that is beyond their utilitarian functions. On the other hand, technological observation through remote sensing tends to focus more on measurable data, on efficiency and resource management. And cultural narratives often advocate for preservation, for respect for indigenous knowledge and sustainable coexistence. And on the other hand, we have technological observation that provides a scientific, objective view of the forest, highlighting aspects such as carbon, biomass, and deforestation rate. And here we might have a potential conflict that arises when technological observation leads to management practices that prioritize economic and environmental efficiency over the values and traditions embedded in the cultural narratives. So it becomes crucial to balance these perspectives, and that requires integrating scientific data with cultural understanding to create holistic conservation strategies that require both technological insights and local cultural values. So it's a balancing act that's it's not easy. And perhaps I'll finish by saying that foregrounding collective and participatory methodologies, also defining what they are, what is truly participatory. Workshops, interviews, community-led mapping exercises, really building the projects from the ground up. Those engagement processes enable the co-creation of possible conservation models. And those models will hopefully reflect the spatial and cultural realities of those communities and also their governance needs, and thereby countering the cognitive injustices and combating the epistemicide that we are currently witnessing. Thank you.
Thank you, Jana. So are there comments, questions?
Yeah, thank you so much for the talk and also for your work. It's fascinating and it's really insightful. So thank you. Both your methodology and your findings. I'm wondering there's two questions and you can choose to answer either one. There are two questions. You can choose to answer either one. One is, I'd love to know more about the long distance walking. If you could talk a little bit more about that and the process and the way you structured that. The other is, on your last slide, you talked about developing equitable conservation approaches by combining technological versus cultural, I think it was, the two. Have you done that? Yeah.
Thank you. The second one is much harder. I think second one is, I don't think I have an answer. It is very much an attempt, and I think the findings of this project, I would very much collaborate with our policy unit within this academy and see how can that actually be developed. Honestly, I have no idea. I think it's quite difficult.
So I'll go to the long distance walking. Long distance walking. It is. Where do I start? Right. So I think when we came to Madagascar with the intent to dive deeper into the soil and the land, and it felt that you can't talk about land and soil without being there. So it felt very the common approach of NGO coming into the context and sitting in a bungalow and the participants coming in and having this monodirectional dialogue or almost like an interrogation. It felt very wrong. For me, it felt very hierarchical, and it wouldn't get into building a relationship with the participants. So after the first exploratory trip, we thought, okay, so how can we do differently? And I didn't know much about Madagascar before coming, so we structured it in a way that when we're in the village, and I'm just going to go step by step, when we were in the village, we would ask who would be willing to participate in the study, and then we'll be invited into their homes and be welcomed in there, and then the following day we would arrive to start our walk in the interview. And it was very interesting because we've been asked the question, so where do you want to go? What do you want to see? Do you want to see vanilla field or rice field? What are you researching? And it was an exercise of giving the the ownership back to the participant, or what is important to you. You guide us to the fields which are important to your family. Tell us why. Tell us your story. We can go 1 hour. We can go 4 hours. It's really up to you to decide. And we did see the shift in the level of engagement. We did see the shift of we were guests and we were being hosted, and it was a completely different discussion. And it also, I think, the struggle to going through the landscape for 3-4 hours, it kind of equalizes you and it humbles you. So it also, I'm not a psychologist, but there is definitely an element in there somewhere on the psychology and belonging in the environment. So that's, if that answers the question more or less.
So I think there's time for one very brief question and one brief answer.
Thank you for an amazing presentation. I was wondering, you talked about matters of care in the methodology that you used, and I was wondering if this project is pretending to give back something to the community as a matter of care as well. Is there sort of like a theory behind what's going to stay?
Thank you. Yes, we not finished with Madagascar. We're definitely coming back and sharing the findings. It is a very good question, and I think it's a very important one. Like, what is the impact of research and who's benefiting? We did see that by bringing the values and telling the stories of belonging in the environment to like a wider global level, on the level of policy discussion or initiatives, that does empower people to own their identities, heritage, cultural values, and not, how would I phrase that? Not to fall into the trap of a typical development, but to own their own narratives. Whether it is successful or not, I don't know yet. We did see one example where they were already forming community initiatives to create a bank of traditional practices, or like a library or archive, whichever way you call it, where it is shared between generations, so those traditions don't disappear into the soil or into the sand. Thank you.
Thank you, Svetlana, for this very nice insights in this case study. We come now to the next presentation. Or if you want applause, of course. Sorry. It's by Jana James, and she will. The title of her presentation is "Narrowing Process Towards Agroecology: Co-Designing an Indicator Framework." Great.
Hi, everyone. First, I want to say that I'm really grateful to be here in beautiful Oaxaca on these lands. There's so much biocultural diversity here, in large part due to the ongoing stewardship of the Mixtec Zapotec and other peoples who have been here since time immemorial. And the work that I'm sharing today on behalf of my colleagues is from a collaborative project called Construyendo Caminos, that I hope also celebrates the biocultural diversity of diverse campesino communities across Latin America. So, just to provide some background on how this project emerged, in the literature you often find approaches to assessing agroecology that rely on agricultural census data, which can provide semi-regularly collected data at scale, or on interviews and surveys with farmers on the ground, which can provide rich place-based contextual insights. However, the former approach is often difficult to align with agroecological principles and can miss important contextual factors, while the latter is often expensive and time-consuming for both farmers and researchers and doesn't necessarily lend itself very easily to comparison. So this led us to the question of how can we harmonize these two approaches to honor place-based experiences and account for cross-context comparability in the pursuit of more agroecological futures. So to get at this question, we're conducting a multi-year project to assess agroecology across Latin America using a participatory action research or PAR approach. So for those new to PAR, it represents a way of co-designing research with non-academic partners in a way that ensures research is context appropriate, valuable to local communities, and equitable in both process and outcome. Our partners are 10 different organizations that work with hundreds of smallholder farmers as part of participatory guarantee systems in 7 different countries, which you see on the slide. And with our partners, we've collaboratively developed, collected, and measured a suite of agroecological indicators on around 300 farms using open source digital tools based on principles of technology and data sovereignty. So also just quickly, for those who aren't familiar with what participatory guarantee systems are, and I think in many contexts we're more familiar with the third-party organic certification system. So these stand in contrast to that model. They're participation-based rather than fee-based. There might be a small fee, but the idea is that farmers participate in this network and they certify one another as agroecological or organic, and it's based in principles like transparency, trust, accountability, relationships with consumers, and farmer autonomy. So rather than relying on an external auditor, you sort of build your own capacity to certify one another as agroecological. I'm going to keep doing that. A major part of our process focused on listening to farmers and farmer organizations to hear what they want. So what we heard is they want data sovereignty and data security. You can see the photo in the top right here. What worries us most about our information security, we're worried that our website might be hacked, our databases might be hacked, nefarious sort of interests might want to access our data. We represent a market of organic farmers. Maybe they'll want to try to sell us external inputs. Or they might even try to manipulate our data in a way that doesn't represent what we're actually doing here. So that was a major concern. They also want comparable and context-specific data at the same time. They want long-term tools to assess agroecological interventions and to improve practices and programs. And they also want evidence to make policy arguments and to carry out local advocacy in their respective contexts. So in terms of the methods, this, as I mentioned, was a PAR project. The methods were very iterative and collaborative. So we undertook a very long process to identify indicators together. We started with a literature review to see what already existed in the agroecology literature. We also looked at the management forms that the farmers themselves use to certify themselves as organic or agroecological. So we were trying to see what are the common data frames, what are they already measuring, and if we don't need to measure something new because they're already measuring it, great, then we don't need to add sort of an additional burden in this context. And then we also held a series of participatory workshops, lots of meetings, online meetings during COVID, as you can see here. And we had peer-to-peer learning experiences to try to get at this dialogue of knowledges, or diálogo de saberes. And we also held things like mysticas to incorporate the spiritual, ceremonial, sociocultural dimensions of agroecology. In terms of data collection, we relied on two digital tools, Light Farm, which was collaboratively developed by UBC researchers, some of whom are in this room, and also farmers from across the so-called Americas. So again, a collaborative project and an app that's free, open source, open access, and available online or on your phone, and also through SurveyStack, which is a survey platform. Both of these tools, like I said, prioritize data sovereignty and technology sovereignty. So the participatory workshops and meetings highlighted how farmers wanted to broaden the scope of what they did track in their management forms for certification. So they wanted to include more detail on topics like gender equity, youth empowerment, biocultural heritage, grower-eater relationships, and other themes. So the next step from here was to identify what would be appropriate indicators to do this. And we sort of had to develop our own collective criteria for how we were going to decide on what indicators to use, because we can't measure everything. So we decided that our indicators needed to be simple, measurable, feasible, flexible, dynamic, and user-inspired. So we landed on some quantitative indicators to easily track over time and across contexts, and to communicate more easily with policymakers who often speak the language of quantitative indicators. And then we contextualize these indicators with qualitative data to capture more detail and depth about indicators in a way that honors diverse ways of knowing and being. So eventually we coalesced on these 11 indicators that you see on the slide here. They focused on core themes covering economic dimensions, social and environmental dimensions. And these are ones that we determined, at least to the best of our ability, met our criteria for good indicators. I'm not going to have time to go into all of them here, so I'm going to focus on the few that are highlighted just briefly in the interest of time. So first, you can see here average total farm size, as well as the size of natural and productive areas on farms. So you can see that farm size differs, of course, based on context. So some of the Brazilian farms are at the top. They're larger. Brazil is a very big country with a large landmass. And then some of the farms in El Salvador and Guatemala are much smaller. But collectively, these farms are managing over 2,000 hectares of land. So there's pretty decent cumulative impact associated with the work that they're doing. So this is looking at crop diversity on the participating farms. All of these farms are pretty diversified across the board, almost by definition, because they're agroecological farms. But there are, again, differences based on context, based on geography, farm size, access to markets, and so on. So you can see here the total diversity is the dark orange bar. So the total number of crop species that are represented across all of the participating farms for an organization, and then the average per organization. So again, we see some of the Brazilian and Ecuadorian farms have a higher level of crop diversity. Again, this reflects their context, their farm size. A lot of these farms are cultivating medicinal herbs and unconventional plants, and they also have different access to local markets, diversified markets, which sort of support them to have diversified production. So gender equity is an important agroecological principle, but in practice, we find that there's still a lot of work to be done. So this is one of the areas that the partners are aiming to further develop programming around based on the project findings. So this figure shows inequitable distributions in decision-making between men and women. There were no non-binary participants who self-identified in this project. So you can see the inequitable distribution of decision-making power within households across the project. Across all four of these dimensions, men are the ones who are predominantly making the decisions. In terms of task distribution, we still see some inequitable gendered relationships here as well. You can see that men take on roles that are perhaps perceived as more traditionally masculine. They manage external inputs and machinery more often than women do. And on the other hand, women do much more of the domestic and care work, as well as activities around food processing and preserving. Of farms that had young people on them, most of the young people were interested in continuing to farm agroecologically. So this is because of its perceived and real benefits. And in following up with youth around this question, we found that this was the case irrespective of income. So they, of course, would like to be making more money, but at the same time, how much money they're making isn't what affects their motivation to participate in agroecological farming, because they view agroecology really as a way of life. This sort of dimension of youth involvement and empowerment on farms is another one of the areas that the partners are developing further programming around based on the project findings, because youth have lower levels of empowerment in certain domains. So in these figures, the darker colors represent lower levels of empowerment, for lack of a better term. So for example, you can see here that on the top left, half of the participating youth say they have low or extremely low levels of financial independence. This trend is repeated across the other domains that you see here: level of access to public policies, their engagement in socio-organizational spheres, and their involvement in agricultural decision-making. So again, looking at the qualitative data, the youth have raised that they want more training, education, and support, as well as better access to things like public policies that can better support them to stay in the countryside, as well as more financial independence. So this project incorporated or attempted to incorporate diverse ways of knowing and being. So we have diverse outputs that try to reflect that better. So there's, of course, the light farm app, as I mentioned. You can see the screenshot in the bottom right here. This was designed for small-scale and diversified farmers. Again, open access, open source, free to use. There are project reports from which the figures that I showed you they were pulled from those project reports. Farmers have used those reports in their advocacy with funders to continue to get funding for their work, as well as with policymakers. So our Ecuadorian project partner actually took their report to their Ministry of Agriculture to try to advocate for the work that their organization was doing. We have the typical peer-reviewed articles and student theses that came out of this, as well as a booklet on how to assess food sovereignty, agroecology, and well-being, which we developed because project partners became really interested in understanding this theme of how agroecology and food sovereignty can enhance well-being. And I wanted to highlight that this booklet is available on one of our community partners' websites. The partner is Sabagro. There's a QR code that you can scan there if you're interested. It's in Spanish, Portuguese, and English, and it's specifically designed to support the capacity of grassroots groups, including farmers and practitioners that are interested in doing their own assessments of farmer and worker well-being. And we've also published a peer-reviewed article that uses this framework too. So just to wrap up, in some, partners in this project have shared how indicator tracking can facilitate agroecological transitions and how this project supports them in communicating the benefits of agroecological food systems to policy and consumer networks in their respective contexts. And participatory action research approaches to agroecological research provide a pathway for amplifying grounded understandings of agroecology by enabling farmers to document and communicate the benefits of agroecology at farm, organization, and policy-relevant scales on their own terms. So with that, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, time is running out, but maybe we have the chance for 1 or 2 questions.
Thank you so much. I really appreciated learning more about this, and I look forward to learning more. I was wondering if you could say 2 more words about the participatory framework that you have for certification. You touched on that briefly. It was in Portuguese. I didn't get it.
Oh, sorry. Yes, the participatory guarantee systems. Yeah, the Spanish and Portuguese acronym is an SPG. There are really interesting examples of participatory guarantee systems. They're much less common in the North American context, but there are a couple. But across Latin America and other parts of the world, there are more common options. So it's a participatory model for certification. Farmers, at least I'll talk about a Brazilian case that I'm more familiar with. So the participatory guarantee system is called Rede Ecovida. And they are a network of farmers. Eaters can join as well. So some interested consumers have also joined, as well as extension agents, practitioners, and farmer NGOs. They act as a network. This particular network operates in the 3 southernmost states in Brazil. And they're organized into groups and then into broader nucleos. And then they have the larger network. The larger network comes together in plenaries every so often. And then the way the certification works, to build in some distance, the groups certify members of other groups to so there's no personal dynamics that influence the decision making, but they've come up with their own criteria around what they want to measure for agroecological certification. And it's a participation-based model. Like I said, sometimes there's a small fee, but much less in comparison to the third-party organic auditing system that, in the global north, some of us are more familiar with. It's meant to reduce farmer dependency on external certifiers and build their own capacity to certify themselves. And in some cases, like in Brazil, they've been able to advocate at the national level for agroecological certification to have an equal footing with organic certification. So you'll see both labels reflected.
Thank you, Jana, very much for this interesting case study again. So please an applause. Still, we have 2 presentations left, and next here comes Isabelle. Her talk is on sustainable land use systems and the path forward to collectively achieve land degradation neutrality.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you all for being here. I would like to take this opportunity not to speak to you as a researcher as such, but rather as an SPI member of the UNCCD. So I will guide you through what I mean by that. Okay, so this topic that I will talk about today on sustainable land use systems, the path forward to collectively achieve land degradation neutrality, is a project that we have been elaborating as a large number of people. Annette Curry and I have been co-leading this, and there's a large number of authors, lead authors, contributing authors. What I am presenting you today is something that has to do with the United Nations Convention on Sustainable, not on Sustainable Development, but on desertification. No puedo. So United Nations Convention to combat desertification is one of the 3 Rio Conventions of the United Nations from 1992. We hear a lot about the conventions on climate change and biological diversity, but rarely about this on diversification. UNCCD is the acronym, is the global voice of land. So this is actually a voice that we all should listen to. It was ratified by 197 parties in 1994. This year we celebrate the 30th anniversary of this convention. And the Conference of the Parties, the COP, is the main decision-making body of the UNCCD. It started in 2001 and they have biannual meetings. The COP16 is going to take place as the last COP meeting of the United Nations Convention in this year, which is a historic year in that sense, from December 3rd to 13th. And the topic is Our Land, Our Future, which we will be having in Saudi Arabia. Soil degradation and desertification are those key topics that this convention is worried about. It's worried about because soil and land is our voice. Next one. What is the science policy interface? The science policy interface is unique for this convention. It was established in 2013 and it translates scientific findings and assessments into policy-relevant recommendations. It uses and produces peer-reviewed technical reports, and it also communicates with the larger scientific community about the scientific knowledge requirements of the UNCCD. So what we are talking about, sharing here, is something that we should bring to the COP, to the decision makers in the 197 countries. This morning we heard that land degradation and desertification is difficult to see. You remember this statement from Ruth de Vries? But it matters and requires immediate and long-term actions, even though we are not able to really see the impact or the dimension, the complexity of degradation. And we got a D with respect to our role in communicating our science to policymakers. This is how the SPI, the Science Policy Interface, is structured. We translate science to inform policy and communicate policy issues in need of scientific input. These are the numbers that accompany the call for this COP of this year. What I would highlight here is if current trends continue with respect to degradation, to restore 1.5 billion hectares by 2030 to reach land degradation neutrality goals. Next one. What is land degradation neutrality? It's like the Paris Agreement for the Convention on Climate Change. It is a state whereby the amount and quality of land resources necessary to support ecosystem functions and services to enhance food security remains stable or increase within specified temporal and spatial scales and ecosystems. This is a scientific conceptual framework for the LDN, the land degradation neutrality. What we want is to reverse, to reduce, and most of all, to avoid degradation. These are these response hierarchies that we need to maintain to avoid new degradation and to reverse past degradation. Our goal is to achieve land degradation neutrality. So what this requires is that we need monitoring of the long time scale where we want to consider this framework in respect to planning and gaining insight by adaptive learning. So land degradation neutrality indicators are those that we need to monitor. They are very simple: land cover, land productivity, and carbon stocks. Very biophysical. And this has been criticized because we are missing the enormously important human dimension. Next one, there's a whole report written by the SPI on the scientific conceptual framework of the LDN. So, why are we here? In the last COP, the COP15, a decision was made by the policymakers that we need to deliver a science-based evidence on sustainable land use systems. So here you see written from A, B, and C what has been required or asked for from a group of scientists at the global level, at the regional level. There are about 30 people. The ultimate goal is to provide guidance to enable countries to employ more sustainable land use systems to achieve land degradation neutrality. How do we plan and how do we implement this LDN? Next one. So the SPI was charged in 2 years. We had to produce this report to respond to this request. We conducted a literature review on the definition and the elements of sustainable land use systems. We did an online survey with those countries that have been adopting or have agreed to implement land degradation neutrality. We did assessment of the national reports on the experiences of those countries implementing sustainable land use systems through land degradation neutrality planning, and we looked at some case studies. Today I will just give you a brief overview of how we approached it and what we turn in as a report. So land is a key resource for life. This is how we start. Land is highly diverse with respect to climate, biota, soil, natural resources. Land occupies place at the interface of nature, human population, economies, and knowledge systems. Land use has a complex relationship with food production, with biodiversity conservation, ecosystem restoration, and peace building. And ultimately, land also has highly complex roles in shaping less tangible assets, as we have also heard in this beautiful talk on soils, such as sense of place, identity, meaningful places, and social and cultural values. I would like to highlight here that indigenous worldviews of land. Land is an extension of the human body for many indigenous cultures, and their ancestors remain alive in the land. For example, the Comcac, this indigenous group in Quickie, Hunt, means land, earth, soil, place, age of people, time, and space. This is the complexity of how other ethnicities relate to land. Next one. Land use systems are interconnected and dynamic systems of resources, uses, and users, and they support multiple uses, are managed by diverse actors and stakeholders, and operate at variable spatial and temporal scales. This was our framework. So how do we define, based on this literature review, sustainable land use systems? A sustainable land use system is a dynamic mosaic, because we talk a lot about land use systems, but we never really define what we mean by systems. It's a dynamic mosaic of integrated land uses located within a landscape that balances the many sometimes competing demands on land to support environmental sustainability, economic viability, and social justice, particularly for those who live or support their livelihoods. We need to take, because of that, a socio-ecological systems approach. These are the key elements that we have been identifying of sustainable land use systems, related to biophysical processes, functions, attributes, enablers, and landscape integrators. These are our three objectives with the different elements. This is our framework. We propose a very important inclusive approach, inclusive participation to achieve the sustainable land use systems, and we provide guidance on action. So we provide a guide to apply a sustainable land use systems approach that we define together socio-ecological context. We empower key stakeholders in landscape management and monitoring. We co-conduct land use system analysis. We identify collectively transformative options to achieve sustainable land use systems. We do joint land management planning to develop adaptive land uses to support sustainable land use systems. We jointly implement land management plan, and ultimately we implement iterative monitoring, evaluation, and learning. This is the guide that we provide in detail, step-by-step description. We propose a scoring approach for each of the elements, for each of the sustainable land use system elements, for the environmental sustainability elements, for the social justice elements, and for the economic viability elements, always from 1 to 5, 1 being lowest and 5 being highest. And so finally we have this graphical template for presenting the scores for each sustainable land use system elements, and this is how we propose that that countries applying sustainable land use system approach to achieve land degradation neutrality can report and plan accordingly. We have key messages for the stakeholders that are present, the policymakers of the countries in the COP, that sustainable land use systems support the achievement of land degradation neutrality. It also helps to achieve multiple sustainable development goals. It needs to be tailored toward each location. There is not a one-size-fits-all. We need to put the context into the local context, and sustainable land use systems require enabling environments. So this is the message that we will take in a month or so to Riyadh. And I would like to end to make a little bit of promotion. I would like to encourage all of you presenters and all of you being at this meeting of a brand new journal, Earth Stewardship. It's a journal from the Ecological Society of America and the Wiley in partnership. We accept from papers to poems to videos, basically everything you can think of to relate or foster Earth stewardship. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So, 1 or 2 questions again? Or comments? So, if not, maybe I can pose a question. Thank you for this very interesting approach for science policy interface. I would really like to learn more about the process, about the method you applied, how you maybe also tackled challenges or maybe conflicts about what to choose or what topics to choose, or maybe where the like contestations maybe. I mean, we could maybe.
It's a very long discussion actually, because it took us 2 years really to get to grips, because we used. We have here one of the consultants that was hired by the UNCCD who did the literature review, and it was finally a consensus of representatives from scientists and policymakers from all around the world, really, because this report was peer-reviewed several times, so we got strong feedback from the countries, and they are very much interested that the language that appears in the approach and the proposal really reflects their interests and needs. So, it's an enormous learning experience.
So you work with a peer review process. Okay.
Yes,
interesting.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we have, last but not least, thank you very much again. And sorry. A last presentation. Do we have technical issues or does it work? Okay. So we have maybe to wait a little bit, or if you have further comment, or Elizabeth, maybe. So question.
Yeah, thank you. I've heard about this work. It's lovely to see the details. So thank you. I was wondering more if you could talk a bit more about the challenges you faced for adoption, right? So I think it's one thing to come up with a framework for, but could you give a couple examples perhaps of how it's been applied and some of the ways in which it was applied and the challenges in doing so?
I mean, it has not been applied yet. We propose the framework on how to adopt sustainable land use systems. And we have gone through the peer review process, but right now we hope that the countries at the COP will adopt the report that we are going to present and discuss and negotiate. Okay?
So thank you again, Elizabeth. So now we come to our final presentation by Jo, which is on what future for the upland farming landscape of northern Laos.
Thank you very much. My name is Jana. I'm a PhD student from the University of Bern in Switzerland. Today, let me share some insight from our research work on the visioning exercise at the local community level in the northern upland landscape of Laos. So from the background photo, you might already guess what is going on there. It's actually a maize intensive monoculture, which is also known as a boom crops in the area. Is the main challenge in that particular area. That's why we make it interesting for us to deep dive in. So when I mentioned about the cash crop, boom crops, some of you might already familiar with the term, but I could also give you some background. It is a kind of extensive agriculture expansion, which usually happening very rapidly. So it's actually typically undergoing quite a unique circle, which I can give you the example from the northern of Laos, where when the crop is established, and then it will start expanding rapidly, and then it would transform the kind of how would you say the traditional land use, and then at some point in time, the crop might be dramatically dropped due to some of the factors, for example, the shift in the demand of the community. So we know that the hybrid maize is really significant in our area. So it's actually start from almost 2 decades ago. And some farmer has already experienced some challenges, like some adverse impact, like land degradation or biodiversity loss and so on. But what we would like to know more about in this context, to really dive deeper on how local community are tackling with this boom crop like the result from the degraded environment, and also if they are trying to apply a good pathway to transitioning out from this unsustainable farming system. So we conduct our research in the northern part of Laos. What it makes really interesting in this context is that the kind of land, we call it the transition of the land use, which transitioning from relatively multifunctional landscape to more monoculture landscape in the downstream area. I have to mention that in the first two upstream village is also part of the national protected area. So the key question we would like to explore in this study is to really get the idea and also the vision from local community. What are the ideas that they want to deal with this boom crops, and what policy recommendation can be derived from this case study. And another part of this research, we would also like to contribute to the quite recent nature future framework in terms of the case study in applying in this such a local scale and also in the global south context. So we use the nature future framework to really trying to get the vision and the action for kind of transformative idea from local community. So what is really interesting for with this framework is that it allows us to explore the value people preference in to the nature relationship in multiple dimensions, like in intrinsic values, relational, or instrumental values. So we structure our work in 3 different steps. The first one is to really get understanding the current stage or status quo of, and also the pressure of the relationship with nature from the local community. The second one is to really co-develop a vision for more desirable futures. And the third one is to really find idea also or the strategy for how to transitioning to that desirable scenario. So this is some snapshot from our fieldwork. So we've in total we've organized 4 focus group discussion. So we try to also invite a broad range of stakeholders in order to really capture the different perspective or opinion from the diverse stakeholders. And we spent more or less 2.5 hours on average in each discussion. So what we found from the first step is, as you can see on the map, it's actually part of that participatory mapping of the different values of the nature. So you can see on the maps that we put in different color. It's also show the different value of the nature. We also observe that the value are quite diverse in the upstream multifunctional landscape, as you can see. But in terms of the pressure, we also identify a kind of quite similar pressure, but different intensity, as you can see, like in the downstream village, where the land use are quite homogeneous. It's actually the pressure are really intense. So based on that finding, we also try to place them into the triangle. So as you can see, a lot of them, most of the village are concentrated on the angle of the nature for society, or the instrumental value. So which is also quite consistent with what we have on our drawing. So in terms of the vision, we see quite a contrast between the first downstream village and also the upper the 2 upstream village. For the case of the monoculture landscape in the downstream, we get the vision from a local stakeholder that they want to really keep going with the maize monoculture, because they don't really have any other alternative. And their livelihood is also quite dependent on that practice. On the other hand, in the upstream village, it's quite different because stakeholders indicate that they want to keep the forest because one of the reasons that could explain is that it's also part of the national protected area, and also the incentive that we get from local stakeholders that the NTFP, non-timber forest product, mushroom, which is in high demand from the Chinese market. So that also substitute supplement the income of local stakeholders that incentivize people to really keep the forest. And based on that, we also try to illustrate them into the triangle, and then we see that the pattern, the way vision of the people want to move forward. So we saw that the upstream village really want to move to the nature for nature, and another one for nature for society. So this also could imply kind of the policy support, like to get a more specific or targeted policy support in order for them to really realize that desirable pathway. So in conclusion, maybe I will jump already to the last point. Lesson learned we get from applying this nature feature framework in this context is that we find that this triangular value is really extremely difficult for local stakeholders to understand because it's really abstract for them. That's what we get, which is also quite contrast to the previous study that mostly conducted in the global north country, and also dealing with people from like highly educated member of the society. And we also observe a kind of quite homogeneity of the vision that we get from different stakeholders, because that could be the influenced by stakeholders that also involved in that workshop. So, for example, some of individuals are really powerful than the others. That might also distort the way people want to express their own opinion. And the last one, because our work, we also, because we have quite a limited time, we organize only just one single participatory workshop. We are aware that it might not be enough or to really derive a more insightful result. So we also recommend a kind of more interactive process, like interactive integration that would also allow different stakeholders to mutually learn and also readjust. That's the feedback from from our work. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for this nice case study again. So we have time for questions, for comments, for ideas coming up. You say.
Thank you very much for the really interesting presentation. In your conclusions slide, you were sort of saying about the one-time process. So as part of your PhD, do you plan to go back? And I noticed again in your conclusions about there wasn't much appetite for change because of the lock-ins. So if you are going to go back, are you going to use the Three Horizons framework to try and understand how you get through some of those barriers, and if there are potential pathways to allow more transformative action and to repeat that process of visioning and development of pathways.
Yeah, that's this finding could also be really a starting point for me to really further develop and also to really build on that and potentially be get more insightful result in the future. Certainly, I will also consider it as also the next step for my PhD to really deep dive into the topic.
Was this raising your hand? Okay.
Thank you. Really cool talk. I'm interested if you could elaborate a bit on the challenges that the local community, like you mentioned at the end, that they had difficulty of following the MFF concept. So, which is curious because I think it was like initially one of the purposes to be designed is to incorporate like these different value perspectives or these multiple dimensions. And so, I'd just be curious of what experiences you have there.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, it was we were really the original plan was really try to explain to them this kind of concept, but when we don't want to really provide a kind of subjective clue to them. That would also mean a kind of we provide a kind of our own idea to them. No, like we wanted to really limit providing the example, or that would also be influence the way they give us the information. So what we did is that we try to find really some language which is more related to their daily livelihood, like something very easy and also for as part of their daily life and so on. And also we did at the end try to give a lot of examples to them, which not really ideal, because what we observe is that what they provide is actually limited to what we have given the example. They don't really have other ideas. They come up by themselves.
Okay, thank you very much again. So, your hands. I think we've reached the end of the session, but before you all run away and go on enjoying this wonderful conference, I have a small advertisement block, because I'm also a member of the coordination team of the Global Land Program Working Group Co-Production of Sustainable Land Systems. And if you are interested to get involved in this working group, just come to me during this conference. I'm very, very happy about that. Or go to the website there. You also found our working group, and you can write an email, get to the mailing list. But yeah, don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you very much, and enjoy the conference.